Hello, and for today's video I'm going to be having a look at some basic weathering. So just going to go through what tools and paints I'll be using and a little bit of an explanation as well. Okay, so starting off with some of the paints I'll be using, and this is the Mechanica Standard Grey. So this is just a nice sort of solid grey, so you can just use this for some sort of like chipping effects. It's not too bright or anything, so it adds to a little bit of texture as well. And I've got the Lead Belcher, which is a sort of a gunmetal silver. So it's not ultra shiny, so you can use different silvers depending on what you want to do and what you think looks best. But I tend to like to stick with this one because it's a bit of a darker, grittier look to it. And then one of my favourite paints is Citadel's Typhus Corrosion technical paint. So this one's quite a nice paint. It's a bit different because inside it's a little bit more sort of textured. It's got a bit of a grittiness to it, so when you actually sort of applying it on, it gives a bit of sort of a muddy, dirty look to it. And if you actually run your fingers actually over the paint, it's got a bit of you can feel the texture, so it does give a nice finish. And for some of the brushes I'll be using, just a mix of Citadel brushes and brushes I've got lying around. So this is just an old shade brush, which has seen better days, but it works perfectly for some dry brushing. So you can just use anything you've got lying around, just as long as it's got some sort of like quite stiff bristles on it. And then an old art supply brush. This one thanks to Winton. And this one, same thing again, small dry brush, so for doing smaller areas. And then just the normal little brush, and this is just ideal just for doing some edge lines on smaller sections where you want to be a bit more controlled. Then move on to the sponges for doing some of the sponging on the model. So these are just some normal kitchen sponges, just rip them up a bit and just picked at them just inside the details here, just to give a little bit of a sort of a bit of a textured feel to it, and so then when you sponge onto it, it will just pick up certain details. And so I've just made up a couple of those. It's something you can just get a load out of a single kitchen sponge. So that's all the parts I'll be doing, and then as you can see, I will be doing some weathering on the Master Grade expansion set for the Gundam Barbatos. So I'll be doing the first 3 forms for today, and then at a later date I'm just going to paint up the 5th form parts and the 6th form parts. There's a few more parts in that, so I'm going to leave that for a little bit later. Okay, so there you go. So let's just jump straight into some weathering. Okay, so let's start with some weathering. First thing I'm going to do is some dry brushing on the blue sections with some silver. So just wiping off a bit of the excess so there's not too much on there. And then just going lightly over the edges. And just giving it a bit of a build up around areas which could get a bit more worn. So here I'm just slowly working in the paint slowly, just to give a slow wearing effect. And there we have first part here. Okay. And now I will just go on and do the next one, and then I'll come back to you again for the next stage. Okay, so for this bit, this is with the silver applied onto the blue sections and the shoulders here. Good thing with the dry brushing is it doesn't take long to dry, as you're just applying very small amounts of paint. So now we'll just move on to the next section. Okay, so here's quite a fun bit. This is where I get to use some sponges. Way up here. So these are just your normal kitchen sponges, just ripped a few up. So I've got a couple different ones. I've got this one which is just a bit smaller, and just sort of picked a few bits out of it, and that just gives it a bit extra texture. So just gonna put a little bit onto the sponge and then just dab a bit of it off. So very similar to the dry brushing for this. And then just gonna go carefully over the armour and go over the edges, and then I'm actually just going to do a little bit over what I've done, a little bit, not too much, just a little bit. Just to give a little bit of added texture to the colour. And then back over this part of the white. And there we have, so you just get it clear. Okay. Just gives a little bit of a chipping effect onto the white of the armour, and then a little bit on the blue as well, just to, as I say, just to give a different bit of texture to the colour. Okay, so I'm just going to finish up on the next few pieces and then go on to see the next bit. Okay, so let's just take a quick look at the other sections I've completed. So here I have the shield with a bit of added with the Mechanicus grey and the silver slightly showing through. And then the other shoulder. Okay, so for the next part is one of my favourite bits, and that is getting the paint a bit mucky and giving it that sort of muddy, gritty look to it. So back with the sponge again, and this time using Typhus Corrosion. So it's got a bit of a texture to this one, and it does help just to give a bit of a muddier feel and a bit of a dirtier look to it. So we'll start off on the shoulder. So make sure to dab off a bit of it. And the added darkness on here gives it a bit of a mucky look, especially against sort of the white there, and a bit on the edges just to give that dirt build up. And just a little bit for splatters of mud over the armour itself. Then give it a bit of a wipe with your finger just to almost blend it in a little bit. Just finish up. Need a little bit more, but just remember to take off as the vast majority of it off the sponge before you actually go over. So nicely gritty and weathered shoulder number 1. So just going to go on and do the next couple pieces, and then I'll move on to the armour of the Barbatos. So just to show the difference, you can see it's got that much grittier, dirtier look. Bit muddied, bit worn. So onto this piece now. Once again, make sure you get off a lot of the paint before you start. And just build it up slowly. You don't have to be symmetrical with any of this, which makes it so much more fun just to use. So if you have a few extra splodges which look a little bit heavier and you don't quite like them, you can just rub them with your finger a bit, blend it in, or leave them if you want a heavier mud patch across there. And just put some splatters across the decals as well. We'll be then sealing this all again once we've finished with another matte top coat. Okay, so now there we have it. 2 dirtied, muddied shoulders, ready for a top coat, and then going on to the Barbatos. Well, just before I've done that, looks a bit too clean on the front surface here, so I'm just going to muddy it up a bit. Just slowly dab a little bit over it, just like this. And so there you go, looks a little bit less clean there, and then you can just do a little bit as you do it. That's why it's quite nice just to do little bits at a time and then build up to the effect that you want. So there we go, there, that's it all done. Okay, so before I move on to the arm, just going to do the armour panel. So this one here, I'll be doing the same as I did with the blue. And I'm just going to be doing this all in one go with each stage. So just going to get a bit of the lead belcher silver, wipe off a bit of the paint, and then just going to pop that off for now, and then can just dry brush a bit of silver. So any of this, you don't have to be too neat, because you're going to be going over with some of the dirt after as well, so you'll be covering up a bit of it. And sometimes it's quite nice just to have a little bit more worn patches, just gives it quite a nice little finish to it. So a bit like that. So now be moving on to doing some Mechanica Standard Grey for the light grey and white sections. So I get my sponge out, which I was using for the grey, and then dab a bit of it away, just so you don't get too much paint. And then can start just building up a bit of debris over here. If you need to add a little bit more paint, to the sponge, just go ahead, just take off a bit. Sometimes you can end up taking too much off of the sponge before you apply it, so it loses a bit of its darkness. Just doing a bit more attention onto the edges and being careful not to drop it too much. Okay, there on this piece. So moving on to the blades of this. This might do a different way around for this. I might add some silver in afterwards for this time round. Just gonna mucky it up a bit, so you don't have to be too careful. Just do it a little bit at a time and slowly build up to the desired effect. You can use the sponge more as a brush, so you can sort of do a few streaks across if you want as well. You can use it however you want to get whatever effect. It's one of those things where you can just try it and just see what works for you. Because what works for me and what I like might not be what you like. There we have the blade a bit worn. So put that one to one side, as some of the paint's was a bit damper on that one. So now I'm going to move on to the Typhus Corrosion with a bit of a shake, and then get your sponge you were using. So you can't use these sponges forever. Eventually they will sort of soak up too much of the paint and then start drying, so they won't become as effective. So you might just need to break off some more sort of sponge just to carry on going, but just try to use it sparingly and it should last you for most of the time that you're going to need it for. And so just building up a bit of grime over the silver just to muddy it up, and then doing the same over just giving it a bit of a grimy look to it, because you're going over it with a base of a purple. It's already quite a dark tone, so you can go a little bit more on here, and as you see it covers over the silver just a little bit, and it's got a dirty sort of silvery sort of vibe to it, with a bit of the brighter silver shining through on some parts. So there we go. And now onto the blades. So for this I'm going to do a bit of a muddier bit on the edgings, but when it comes to the tips here I'm going to be going over it with a bit of a silver afterwards. So there we have there. As you see, it's quite quick to do, and if you are struggling for time to weather up a kit, this is definitely quite a nice way to do it. It does give you a really good effect overall, so you can see it nice and clearly. So now I'm going to go back to the silver, and this time I'm going to use a slightly smaller dry brush here. And as with any of the dry brushing, any of the techniques I'm doing right here, you want to use as little amount of paint on the actual brush or the implement as you'd like, and so then you can just, and then as some of the brown and the paint is still not 100% dry, it will sort of blend a little bit together, which isn't too bad because it does muddy it up a little bit. Just a little bit more, and then just make sure the back is just as you would like it. So when I put them all together, before I do that, how can I forget this bit? So a bit of silver onto the sort of like the bracket section here, just to give it that slight metallicness to it. Just like that. Quick and easy, dry brushing can get you some really nice effects. Definitely a great way if you want to save time on your painting, or if you don't have the time to go into some more elaborate styles. I'm in a bit in between. I like the dry brushing effect, and I may have a bit of time to do it, but at the same time I like to see the model finished, and just like to see what my vision looks like once it's done. So there, and now pop that into the arm there, and here we have the back of the arm claw. Okay, so for this part I'm gonna just go ahead and detail up and weather up the arm the same way as I've shown on the other sections, and then once I've done that I'll come back and show you how it looks after its weathering. Okay, so there I have, I've finished off the arm, and let's just have a look at it equipped with the armour. There you can see it's got its real worn battle look, quite muddy and gritty, all ready to go back on the Barbatos. And so just so you can see the other side, and then part of the other part of the first form, which just replaces this purple claw section. Okay, well, I hope you've enjoyed this little tutorial on how to weather Gunpla, or for anything in particular you'd like to weather. Now all these techniques are applicable to anything, and so hope you all learned something, and if there's any questions you have, just leave me a comment in the comment section, and if you've enjoyed this, please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done already. So thanks a lot, hope you've enjoyed this, and see you next time.